Can you say hard hats, folks? Hard hats, lunch pail, steel toe boots?
Anything short of a championship this year is a failure.
Look at this boomer right here.
You've just got so much talent here.
Somebody said we need to apologize for Jaylen.
Can I close it, John? What are we apologizing for? What did we say? What did we do?
Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome to another Garden Report postgame show. Just 2 to go. And this is the final scheduled one. We'll get another Celtics Summer League game before the Vegas slate ends out there. And I am out of there. Moved on yesterday. Took me a while to get out of there, but I did. Noah remains the only Celtics reporter on the ground in Vegas. So she covered what was another sloppy, inconsistent, and sometimes hopeful Celtics Summer League game here, but they fell short of trying to come back, got within 5 in the fourth quarter, and then the Mavs went on a big run to close this one, and they win, send the Celtics to 2-2. I guess they were saying on the broadcast, no, they still had a chance at the playoffs. I didn't know that, but they're not going to the playoffs now out there at Summer League, so they'll just play a consolation game effectively before this ends. Hopefully it's against an interesting team. Because now J.D. Davison joins Springer, Cada, Peterson among the Celtics who took a seat over the last couple games here. And we got to see a lot more of the guys deeper on the bench, along with Jordan Walsh and Baylor Scheierman and Jaylen House, who got the spot start today and was probably the best Celtic out there in this one, in my mind. So let's start with Walsh. It's tough, right? 0 for 22 from 3. The shot just isn't coming around. And he had a better second half. And I feel like the last 3 games, we've seen him try to stay in the game by doing some other stuff. But 0 for 22 is a big number. And the struggles have just mounted. I know you talked to him a little bit after the game about the big expectations he went into this with and how he's tried to showcase his talents beyond his role here. And however mentally he went into this and however mentally he tried to get through the struggles in the first game have just put him in a really bad place this week. So things seem to be turning on him fan-wise, Noah, at least from the mentions I'm getting. But I do think you can just chalk this up to it being a weird week from the field and a bit of a wake-up call for him in terms of approach, that he just kind of has to tighten things up, narrow his focus, and go back to doing what he was doing last year in Maine. And you have to think with what we saw from him this week that another at least start of the season in Maine is all but inevitable here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was going to be the outcome, even if he played better here in Summer League, that he was going to start off in Maine and get more reps there. And listen, here's my take on Jordan Walsh. He's obviously having a really tough Summer League, and his shot has been brutal. But he's also not an 0 for 20, however many threes it's been. Like, that's not his shooting percentage, and that's not the type of shooting that he showed in a much, much larger sample last year in Maine. This has been all in the course of 1 week, right? So as much as it's frustrating and it's tough and it looks like, you know, right now it's when a guy's in this kind of slump, it just looks terrible. It looks like a disaster. You know, Sam Hauser had a slump like this year. So I would just urge everybody to not read too much into that, because the shot will fall and eventually he'll be back to 35-ish% from 3, the way that he was in a much larger sample size this past year across many Maine Celtics games. And so I'm less worried about that. I think there's other things that you have to wonder about around his maturity, around his ability to kind of stay with it. Like, you know, DJ McClay, the head coach of the Summer League team, said last game something that really stuck out to me. It was the last question of the presser. I asked him, like, well, how are you evaluating Jordan's performance? And he said, you know, we just really need him to compete. Like, we need him to maintain a competitiveness. And it's not a good sign, right, to hear that a guy needs to be told that at this point, that we need you to compete. Like, this is obviously, everybody here is if they're doing anything, they're competing, right? So to me, the biggest thing is just the mental piece, because the shot is going to fall. He's not a sharpshooter, like, that's not his thing, but I'm more worried about just like the fact that he seems mentally to have room to grow. And again, he's a young 20-year-old, and people are like, I feel like I've been getting mentions being like, I feel like he's been in the G League forever. He was in the G League for 1 year, right? There's a long track record of players that have really struggled in summer league with their shot and ended up being fine. So I don't want to read too much into a week's game, but it definitely shows you that he has room to improve and room to grow from a maturity standpoint and a kind of an emotional standpoint.
Yeah, and the 0 for 22 means something. It's startling to miss that many in a row, and it clearly shows where he's at mentally with the shot, at least this week. And he still has plenty of time this summer to tinker with it and go back to the basics. I haven't taken a long look at what the release is looking like, but it does feel like he's long and short on it. More short than long, it feels like, overall, from what I've seen.
Definitely more short.
So this is something he can shake off for sure. The approach, as you're talking about it, is definitely what's concerning here. It doesn't look like he knows where his spot is on the floor. At times, he's losing the ball in the lane. His decisions aren't quick, and you have to make quick decisions in this offense. I think that's something Scheierman's done a better job with, while shooting as inconsistently effectively here as Walsh. I know he hasn't missed every three, but he's missed a bunch to start off his first summer league here. But he's just making quicker decisions with the ball, getting it off it faster, not trying to dribble too much. You talked about that a little bit last game, Noah, just how much he's dribbling, and that's never a good thing, especially for a guy who isn't going to be a ball handler for this team. Now, I'm not panicking. There's certainly a ton he has to tighten up. I expected him to be in Maine this year anyway. I was one of these people who are like, maybe he can contribute, maybe he can get a few minutes. I think he's so early in his development, and the biggest thing for him is that patience. You come in, you're so eager to get involved. You're talking about playing with Brown and Tatum and being this guy who can help them open up their games. And that just might not be what it is for him here. And he somehow has to shift his mindset from, I'm going to be contributing to this championship team, to, I'm going to be a major piece on the Maine Celtics. And I know you have to set your sights a little higher there in terms of your confidence and your goals and all of that. But as you mentioned, DJ, it's a patience thing. It's a daily work ethic thing. It's a step-by-step approach. And I think there's a bunch of guys who have gone through this Maine system here, Davison among them, who had to learn that it is about one possession, one game at a time here. And you can't even think about Boston, I don't think, until you get into that mindset. And I thought he got to that place last year. But once that season finished, or maybe it was being around the championship team, Noah, for as long as he went right back to who he was last summer, which was the guy who was talking constantly about how he's going to impact the Boston Celtics this year. This was him after the game speaking to Noah.
More pressure on you going into summer league this time because you've had a year. I feel like a lot of times guys are like looser their first time and then they come back and it's like all this pressure. It's like you want to show you've improved. Do you feel that way at all? That you feel like more's been on your plate? More's. Do you feel that way at all? That you feel like more's been on your plate?
I feel like you kind of have to go in like with the mentality of like being better than you were before. And I guess that's kind of like what slumped me in the beginning. Just kind of going in with that mentality, not going in with the mentality of, I got to go in and play as hard as I can. The results are the results. So now I'm trying to switch to that and let that be the main goal and see how it goes.
So, yeah, where's your sense of where he's at mentally right now, Noah?
I think he's frustrated. He's good with the media. Like he'll take his time, and he was very friendly to me, even though I'm sure the last thing he wanted to do was talk to media again about his struggles. But just looking at his body language, and he reminds me when I was a kid playing basketball and I would miss a shot. Like I'm talking like young, and just the way that it starts to just compound the struggles, one shot into another and a bad decision. And I don't think even in the second half there, he got more comfortable and he had a stretch where he was attacking the rim, and that certainly benefited him. I think he's better off when he's driving controlled than when he's settling for threes. But even so, I don't think he ever looked like himself out there, like the Jordan Walsh that I became accustomed to seeing. And I don't know, I'm sure there's a lot of overlap between people who watch Summer League and people who watch the G League, but I also think there's probably people who are just tuning in now because there's all there is to watch right now at Summer League, and they don't usually watch the G League. And I would just say this is not how he looked during the season. It's really not. He had moments of being out of control, but right now it feels like he's under control all the time, every single play. And he was playing a 3-and-D role, and maybe that's all he has right now, is that he has to be in that role to be comfortable, and that he doesn't have more in his game, and that's a point of concern, obviously, because you want him to feel comfortable, at least in Summer League, to be doing more. But I just think in general, like, we love to write people off in Summer League because it's kind of all there is to do. You can either say someone's a huge bust or they're ready for real NBA minutes, and the reality is there's a track record of Summer League not always being the best indicator. So I just urge people, if you're gonna panic about this performance, obviously it's discouraging. It's not what you hope to see out of him. I'm sure it's not what he hoped to do here. It's still just Summer League. Yeah, and I see someone here in the comments that I watched him in the G League and he was way better than this. That's anybody that watched him in the G League can tell you that. That was definitely the case.
Yeah, and I don't know where I want to go with that. I've thought about it from the start because it didn't look right immediately, Noah. It's that Heat game was a mess. Everybody pretty much struggled in that one. The second game got a little bit better after halftime. The third was a bit messy. And this one, again, the structure there offensively for this group, and I know you start to see some guys sit down and the team gets a little bit less talented as you do that. But structurally, this just didn't look like a sound Celtics team. And one thing I think they've done over the last couple of years here, and especially at the G League level, is put a good structure in place, have some guys that can fit roles, and it makes it a good situation for guys to develop or at least showcase themselves in. This summer team hasn't been that. And again, I don't know whether to put it on the coaching or the roster or the individuals trying to fit in across the board here. Like Tilly, I think Tilly sometimes looks like he's just trying to get a lot of shots up. Davison out there has been pretty good running the show, but there hasn't been that big man for him to hit other than Keita when he's been out there, and they sat him down after the second game. So you end up with Watson out there at the 4, and his shot is kind of come and go too. I actually thought they started this game shooting decently, but again, things just look a little sporadic offensively for this group as a whole. So I wonder if that's impacting him here too. Obviously, he's contributing to that with some of the decisions and pressing he's doing out there. But part of me does think this team, this environment, this structure he's in here at Summer League hasn't helped them and has exacerbated some of the struggles he's going through here because it was so tight. It was so well run up in Maine last year, and he adapted pretty well to it. Not that he didn't have shooting struggles up there. He did. But he just looked more comfortable in his role on that team. Especially the one thing we've really missed from him, and I guess he got it back a little bit in this one, is the defensive impact. I know you've talked about that, how he just hasn't impacted the game on that end like he's capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing that really, to me stands out the most, because I think this, Bobby, maybe people have heard me talk, this. I don't overreact to people's shooting struggles, particularly in a 1-week sample size, just because we just know that that's not always reflective of what someone's going to look like. When you do it all the time, then it starts to be who you just are as a shooter. But with him, like, he was pretty consistent last year. But yeah, it's the defense for me. It really is the defense, and it's the defense without fouling. And I really want it to work out for him. He's so likable. There's something about him that you root for him. And I bring up Jaden Springer as an example of somebody who also has limitations and question marks about his game. But every time you see him match up with one of these Summer League, G League guys, even NBA players in the limited minutes we've seen, you see that he's a defensive specialist. Like, he has earned that reputation. It's not just a reputation. It's something that you actually see out there every single time you watch him play. And I feel like with Jordan, it's still more of a concept that he can grow into that defender. And so that, that's why right now, like, that's the thing that I was watching for a lot. And particularly, sitting where I was sitting, you would just get a different vantage point than you do on TV or up high where I normally sit for games. And yeah, he's just a little bit out of position. He's reaching a little bit. So he has a lot of room to grow. I don't know that he has, I don't know that he is going to work out for him. I'm not sure, but I urge people to not overreact to this stint, but you certainly want to see him defensively starting, in a couple months in the G League, picking up the best player every single night and doing a really good job at that. Because even last year in Maine, that wasn't really what his role ended up being, was being that lockdown defender. Sometimes he did, and sometimes he got the best defender, but I wouldn't say he was one of those guys that really stuck out as you don't want to have Jordan Walsh on you, you're going to get killed, in the one game that Jayden played, you did see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing I was going to
obviously
say, Bobby, just about the structure. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think without JD, Jaylen House, and I'm sure we'll get more into him, he did a good job tonight considering how much was on his plate. But JD really calms everybody down and kind of tells everyone where to be. And there was a lot of madness out there today. I felt like you could really feel his absence. That's all.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of those other guys. JD sat this one out. Jamias Ramsey sat this one out as well, which is interesting. I don't think he had officially signed training camp deal yet. So maybe that's coming for him with the shutdown here today. And we are brought to you, as we have been throughout Summer League, by the Game Time app. And right now is a great time on Game Time. Plenty going on this summer. You got WNBA starting up again after the All-Star game this weekend. You have Major League Baseball, and they are partner Major League Baseball as a ticketer. You got plenty of great seat options no matter where you are in the country right now, and they're getting going today after their All-Star break. So go enjoy a baseball game. Go enjoy concerts, events. I know there was a big concert at Fenway Park last night. There's a ton of concerts going on throughout the summer. Big ones in Boston this week at Big Night Live and Roadrunner and all the rest out there, House of Blues. So anything you can think of, it's on the Game Time app. And sometimes the best deals on Game Time are right up until and even after the game starts. That's what I love about it, along with their seat view option, which is probably my favorite part of using Game Time, and I've used it for years now. They have flash deals, exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. You can save more when you pick a certain section with zone deals, and all-in prices show the total up front, so there's no surprise fee at checkout. Lowest price guaranteed on Game Time. They'll credit 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So where do we want to go next? I guess Scheierman is what I want to recap a little bit here. He shot much better in this one, hit his first 2 threes. Overall, I think my assessment of his game to this point is he's better with the ball in his hands than he is without it right now. Defensively, it's going to take some time. So I don't predict we'll see a ton of him right away this season. Maybe you do it just to get a look at what it looks like in tandem with some of the other players on this team. But there's some real skills there that you can bank on with him. And the big three have been just the pure shooting and ability to get that shot off. The rebounding is for real. And when he's not hitting shots, he can go into that passing bag and make some flashy plays with the ball in his hands. And so far, I've liked what I've seen here. Nothing that screams he's going to be a success. I think it's going to take some work and development at the pro level, especially to get his body to that point where it looks like he can compete physically with NBA players. I think he might even have a longer way to go in that sense than Hauser did. But right now, this is a good start for him. And I feel pretty good about him going into his rookie year, just as I did after they drafted him.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with Baylor, the thing that's interesting is he's really not pressing. He's not trying to get a lot of points. He's not trying to, I would say, just watching, we've watched this team now 5 games in a row, that it doesn't feel like this is a guy that's trying to prove anything, which is part of why I think he's been perhaps more effective than some of the other players in the team. And he's not really trying to prove anything because he was their first round draft pick. And I don't think there's a whole lot of pressure on him to be a lottery pick type player, but he's also not fighting for a two-way the way that most of these guys are trying to get an opportunity. So he's in kind of a good position where he can just play within himself. And, he missed some shots earlier in Summer League and he shot better tonight. But in general, I felt like he seems to, he seemed to have been in a pretty comfortable spot. And I asked him post game, like how he'd evaluate things. He said, definitely the athleticism and the spacing is an adjustment. Everybody can shoot. Everybody's a little quicker and stronger. He looked a little bit slow at points. But I like him a lot as a connector and as just a guy you can throw out there and will kind of make the right play most of the time. And you don't get a lot of that in Summer League. A lot of the wrong play was made today on both ends, and I've been here all week watching Summer League games morning to night. It's generally a lot of the wrong decisions, and I feel like he's somebody that from the jump has come in making the right play, and that's an intangible thing that's really valuable. And like you said, I do think that the defensive side is more of a question mark, but watching him, I don't think he's so far out from being able to be a decent defender that he's not going to make it. Like, there's an adjustment to be had, certainly, but I think he's going to get there because it's not, the gap, there's a gap, but I don't think it's insurmountable.
Yeah, and there's a reason people looked at him as a potential contributor. Walsh even, people kicked around, could he get involved this year? Because especially for the rest nights, especially for the injuries that might pop up throughout the course of the year, you're looking at what this team has for depth at that wing spot. It's a little thin when you lose O'Shea Brissett, if that's what's going to happen here. As we've talked about, Shrima Hyluk out the door is one of those depth guys. And you're looking at two young or inexperienced guys, in Scheierman's case, to fill that gap. And listen, if Brown or Tatum end up with some sort of injury, you're screwed regardless. But all they really have that wing spot beyond Tatum and Brown right now is Hauser. And Hauser was excellent last year, consistent throughout. He did have a series or stretches where he'd go cold. And so you're looking at that position in particular and saying, all right, what's the plan behind those guys? You got Drew Peterson on the two-way. We didn't see a ton of him last year at the NBA level. So they're going to need some depth to emerge at that spot. Maybe they go smaller this year and go with some three-guard lineups to help facilitate those second units behind those guys. You certainly are going to stagger Brown and Tatum. But it is something that comes to mind for me right now because I don't think Scheierman is super ready for that off the bat. And I think we've certainly seen here that Walsh has a way to go as well. So we can get in a little of that, but I do want to hear from Scheierman after this game.
Okay, so you've been here for a week now, or a little bit over than that. What do you feel like in general? How would you characterize your performance and just the Summer League experience?
Well, I mean, the Summer League experience has been a lot of fun. Obviously, being able to be out here and compete against different guys has been a lot of fun. As far as my performance, I think I've done a really good job of doing the things that I wanted to do, which was compete and defend and hustle. Obviously went through a little bit of shooting slump the last couple of games, but that's just part of basketball. I'm not really worried about my shooting. Just worried about defense, competing and impacting the game in other ways. And, obviously today I was able to get my shots to fall. But that is what it is. Shots go and they don't. And I'm just trying to focus on competing.
Yeah, and it's interesting when we talk about how Walsh is approaching this, Scheierman with the almost opposite approach so far here. And he has not shot well. I think he was 27, 28 coming into this one, 30 from the field. So he could be handling it the way Walsh is and falling out of the game in the mix. But this is exactly what the Celtics want to see. This is how Tatum handled his postseason. His threes didn't fall. I think DJ has said it. This is the mentality they want these guys to have, is that even if they're not succeeding offensively, you're still doing something for the team here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of that is his age and his maturity. Those couple of years make a big difference as far as being able to handle, adversity and he's played in big moments, tournament moments. He's had a lot of big games. I asked him, where does this fall on the spectrum of like pressure that you have felt playing basketball? And he said, somewhere in the middle. Like, I want to make a good impression, but it's not, it's not like the highest stress environment that he's played in. He's played in higher pressure environments where the game outcomes really mattered, and you can see that. And I don't know that Jordan has had as many of those games under his belt. And so right now, like, he's a known quantity. Everybody in the fan base really knows him and takes to him. And, I think most people are tuning into these games most curious about how he's going to perform. And you can see that pressure weighing on him. So yeah, certainly there's been a disparity between how those two have handled their respective shooting struggles, and also the struggles are very different. I mean, Jordan's been missing rims. Like, he's really way off. But Baylor, I honestly think that I was a little surprised even when I saw you share the total 3-point numbers, because it hasn't felt like his shot's been particularly off. So I don't know. I'm encouraged by what I've seen out of Baylor. I'm curious to see how he'll look with a little bit of a larger role. Like I almost wish he was more aggressive just to see how he would handle it. But the way that he's been playing and the way that he's been performing and kind of doing the little things and seemingly, seems like almost like a leader out there already. Overall, I would say, very encouraging.
Yeah, and I've heard some confidence from the team that if there is a rest night, if there is injuries or something going on early in the year, and there certainly will be, he is ready to go in that kind of role, small minutes in the reserve role. And you have to think if they're willing to let Brissett, Mykhailiuk walk, as it seems like here, they have some level of confidence in him being able to fill the gaps during the regular season. I mean, you take a guy in the first round, you have to hope they're at the NBA level, and that's the positive with Scheierman here, right? 30th pick, 2 guaranteed years. He's ready at 23. Walsh, as I talked about with Gary on here when we had him on last week, he's in a tough spot. Yes, he's 20, 21. Yes, he's still developing and taking his time, but he is on an NBA contract on a team that's paying luxury tax. And if he's not playing at that NBA level into year 3, you do have that $200,000 guarantee on year 3, and there's a team option on year 4. So you do have to show something at the NBA level. Not right now if you're Walsh, but I do think you have to get off to a good start in Maine this year, start to work your way up that ladder and show that the needle's pointing in that direction, because I don't think you bring a guy like that back for year 3 if he doesn't show anything this year. He has to show something, whether it's in Maine or whether it's at that NBA level. And the reason Scheierman's here on a NBA contract, because they view him as an NBA-ready guy right now. And some of these other Maine guys are playing on 2-way deals, right? And again, I think they like Walsh. I think they're committed to him right now. But he's on a guaranteed NBA contract, mostly playing in Maine. So there is some pressure here on him going into year 2, I'd say. There's pressure on everybody on this roster because as the years go on, they're going to have to start to rely on these guys after a certain point. But like we talked about after the last game, it's fortunate that you have the NBA depth you do right now. And if these guys start coming around when they turn 21 or they go into their second and third years in Scheierman's case, that's the positive because you'll need them more then. Right now, as this roster stands, I don't think you really need any of these guys on day 1, at least.
Yeah, honestly, like out of the Summer League roster, the only 2 guys that I could see getting some minutes at some point are Neemias Queta and Jaden Springer, and we haven't seen either of those guys in a little bit here.
Springer's got 3 guys in front of him.
Yeah, but even so, I just think that Jordan is farther down there. JD Davison is farther down. I think Jaden has shown us more to feel comfortable. And even so, yeah, we're probably not going to see much of Jaden, right? So it all depends on injuries, and you never want to hope for injuries, but you also know that they might happen. And Peyton Pritchard didn't miss a game last season, so we kind of forget that he's not invincible. He had the previous year, he had a stretch where I think it was his foot or something that kept him out for a while. So you just never know. Queta is the one obviously that they're going to need the most as far as that big man rotation. Tillman having some limitations, sometimes he kind of deals with his knee things, and Luke obviously is Luke. We know what he brings, but Queta is the one that if he was continuing to play, I'd be watching these games with a little bit more of like this is going to have a real impact on the regular Celtics this year. Right now, I think we're looking more down the road. These are more kind of project type players that we saw, for example, today, and mostly guys, honestly, that will not be on the Celtics roster. And I'm curious to see, as an avid Maine follower, I'm curious to see who will land in Maine and how that'll look as well.
Yeah, and I do see some guys on this roster that I hope end up in Maine because the back end of the bench on this team has competed pretty well when they've gotten the opportunity the last 2 games. Again, in this game, I thought there were some nice performances across the board from those guys, especially given what you expected to see from many of them. Here is DJ McClay talking about Jaylen House, who got a spot start in this game with Davison out and made the most of it. I'm excited to talk about him here.
What do you like out of what you're seeing out of Jaylen House right now, just as far as his ability to be aggressive and everything like that?
His energy's great. He's awesome to have around, and I think just in general, he's really, really taken on a role of trying to pressure the ball, and then I thought he did a good job of handling a massive load offensively today. Just like obviously we're down a couple guards, so he was the one with the ball in his hands a lot, getting us into stuff. organize it that way. So I thought he did a pretty good job of that, considering he had to do all that. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a good description of his game here. He didn't wait. He just went. Numbers might not be super pretty here on the stat sheet, but they needed him to play that aggressively. And there were moments in this game where his offensive aggressiveness and some of the quick moves he's made on defense too have kept him in these games. And there's some fire to his play. I know after he hit a three, he was doing like a little shimmy in front of the other team's bench, right? And he was getting into the mix there in the last game against Charlotte out there. So this guy's been exciting to watch. I did not expect this. I didn't know what to expect out of him at all. I wouldn't have been surprised if he didn't play much, period, in the Summer League. And he just was there to join the Celtics because of his dad. And he admitted that to us, that his dad spoke to Austin Ainge, and that sort of set up the opportunity for him here coming out of New Mexico State. Good college player. He's 23. He's super light. I think he's listed at about 165, 170-ish. But he uses that quickness to his advantage out there. So he's one of these guys on this roster I hope sticks around in Maine. Is there NBA upside there? It doesn't look like it right now, especially at his age. But he's a competitive guy, and I think it helped to have a guy like this in training camp. I think it helped to have a skill set like this up in Maine, as we talk about. You want to have a bunch of different skill sets in the mix, and he looks like he can set up an offensive play. It looks like he can knock down shots. Again, his height, his stature is going to make the NBA a challenge here, but he came out just battling through his first two games here. So this was a pleasant surprise on the Summer League roster.
Yeah, there's always like one or two guys that you don't know if you're gonna see them check in at all, and then all of a sudden they become some of the most impactful players. And he's definitely this summer's surprise to me. I don't know if he even played in game one of Summer League back when the whole group was together. And tonight he was the number one option. I mean, he was creating things out of broken plays. I don't know what he ended up with, maybe 7 of 16 or something like that, but 7 of 19. It's right there. But I think those numbers are a little bit unfair to him because, as DJ McClay said, a lot of that was just he was, end of possession heaves. He took all the kind of tough ones, the little couple Hail Marys there, but he just brought more fire than anybody else on the Celtics today. And there was a couple plays that I posted on Twitter of like him just, getting his own rebound, diving on the floor. He won a jump ball against the guy that probably had a foot on him. So he's fun to watch. He's an energizer. He's one of those players that you naturally just enjoy, you gravitate towards as just a fan of basketball. He's really small. I don't know if it's going to work from that standpoint. I think wherever he does play, though, if he ends up going overseas or if he plays in the G League, he's going to be really good. He's the kind of player that's going to impact any game that he's in. I don't know if he has NBA level potential, but for this level, for what we're seeing right now, he's a whole lot of fun to watch. And you can tell he's a competitor. And he said it to us the other day when we were talking to him. He said, I don't like to lose. This is not what I'm like when I'm off the court. I'm not that much of a trash talker. It's not my real personality, but there's a level of competition with him that exceeds everybody else that we saw today. And that's something you can't teach. So just that alone it stuck out to me because you got guys that are fighting for their lives. You got guys that are proving that they were worth the draft that they were. And he was outplaying them. Defensively, he was a little bit of a liability. And I don't know that there's a whole lot that can be done there just watching him. But just as far, he was just fun.
Yeah, and I've felt that way about some of the other guys off the bench here too. Tyler Cook's been a nice aggressive presence on the boards through the game so far. And I know Austin Ainge, when he was talking to us during the training camp, said he's good with the ball in his hands. And I've seen that too, just making some backdoor passes and just looking around when he gets the ball off the catch rather than trying to go and find his own shot. So that was enjoyable to watch into some of the second units. Ron Harper, as we talked about, has a training camp deal. Finally started to hit some shots in this one, 3 or 6 from 3. That's going to be important for him, regardless of where he ends up. And he's another guy I'd like to see end up in Maine, just to see how it goes from there. Tristan Enaruna feels like that's the path he's on as well. We haven't seen a ton of him in this setting, so I haven't been able to get a good gauge on his game so far. But he wasn't all that spectacular in this one across 14 minutes. And then Killian Tilly, super aggressive. And that's important for him. I don't think it has helped the team a ton at different times when he's been out there, but he did hit shots in this one. His pick and pop game was impactful. And he does have a little bit of wiggle in the lane, which is encouraging to see for a guy who's gone through so many injuries at this point. Just name him. It feels like he's hurt that area of his body. So I'd love to see him rejuvenate himself up in Maine this year. I don't think he's played in the NBA in a couple of years now, and he looks pretty spry for a guy who's gone through as much physically as he has. Who has kind of stuck out to you among the others so far over the last couple of games here?
Yeah, Jemias Ramsey is someone that had stuck out, and I'm not sure why he didn't play today. He was suited, and he just never checked in. Um, but he's someone that stuck out just his pure scoring ability. None of the other guys have stuck out too much. I mean, Ron Harper Jr., I've heard so much about him being here. Like, I feel like every time I sit next to a scout or a member of another team's front office, he's come up with like, "Oh, have you talked to Ron Harper Jr.?" Like, people seem to think really highly of him. Don't know that he's shown us a whole lot, but it's also been limited minutes. So he's someone that's on my radar. He's just he's interesting just because of, I guess, his reputation and kind of what people that have gotten a bigger look at him have thought. But Jaylen House is the one that has stuck out the most as far as his on-court impact. As far as, some of these other guys, it does seem like they're forcing the issue, and he was too, but it seemed like he was doing so more within the flow, and he was also setting up for his teammates. And so yeah, but I don't know that there's anybody else that really, really jumped as like, we got an NBA player here. And even Jay Scrub last year felt like showed more of that complete picture, that you could actually see a real two-way, and then obviously he got one more so than any guy in this group.
Yeah, and we mentioned him. I think we both had a feeling he'd be back in the mix there into training camp, and I guess his agency tweeted out that that'll actually be the case this year. He tore his ACL. Let's see the exact date here, because usually it's about a year to recover.
It was in October.
October 8th, he suffered the ACL. So they waived him late October, underwent surgery in the middle of that month. So that's probably about halfway through training camp. Maybe we'll see him in the mix there. Another guy who showed out here with that kind of skill set. So I'm hoping we get to see it from him into the preseason, because obviously he hasn't recovered in time to get involved with this team here, and they loved him. They had him around the team during the year. It seemed like doing some rehab, especially during the early stages. You could kind of see him around the facility. So I'm interested to see how that's going to go. I could definitely see him being on Maine next year as his rehab continues, and maybe it works toward an eventual two-way deal here. But that's the strength of having these guys in the mix, if they can keep these guys. And obviously the Exhibit 10 deals try to do that. Harper's case is an incentive, a bonus to staying with Maine. I think Anaruna's in that situation too. We'll see who else that they can sign to those kind of deals here. I'm sure they're going through some talks with Ramsey about what kind of contract he could end up playing on into training camp there, because he definitely showed out. I mean, his shooting splits were ridiculous. Now it was like 63% from the field and 60% from three, even if he didn't always make the best decisions with the ball in his hands. That has to be something that turns your head.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm curious about that. I feel like, in a 5-game sample, how much do the shooting splits actually matter? Or are you more looking for the other things? I'm not a scout. I don't know myself. I don't know that I would personally care that much about shooting splits in just this small sample size of these games. He's coming off
60% stands out to me. That's definitely going to make me turn my head and want to get at least a longer look at a guy.
Yeah, but he did. I mean, he made the wrong. I mean, yes, he's the one that I would have chosen. But I don't know all around that he showed what he could do. He was really focused, head down, focused on scoring, and he was able to do so effectively, right? So it works out when it works out. But yeah, on the Jay Scrub piece, like, his agency posted that he's coming back with the Celtics, but I haven't seen any other reporting or been able to get any other clarity on what that means. So assuming it might be some sort of training camp thing, maybe we'll see him up in Maine. And the other thing that's a good reminder is that they'll grab guys from other summer league teams too. Like, this is kind of an audition for the league at large. So I feel like we get kind of hyper-focused on the players that are on this Celtics Summer League team, but who knows? Last year, Drew Peterson came out of Sioux Falls, right? So that could also be a possibility that it ends up, not being one of the characters that we've been closely watching, and it ends up being someone that's been standing out for another team. So I've tried to watch as much other Summer League games as I can, just being down here. But you never know. It could be someone we've literally not on our radar at all that grabs that last two-way if it doesn't end up being, Anton or somebody else.
Yeah, and Anton seems like a good bet. Drew Peterson, I think they went against Drew Peterson last summer league to that point. So you got to look at him with Miami Summer League team, and then ended up signing him later in the year when the Heat couldn't fit him onto a two-way spot. So we'll see what happens with Davison. Looks like he's a pretty good lock to be back on that. Watson again, I think a pretty solid bet for that third spot. Want to just get the training camp, I guess, to make it official. I know I asked him about it down there, and he wasn't thinking about it too much yet. But if I'm picking anyone off this roster that looks ready to go, it's this guy on the defensive end, at least. And the shot making has been there the last couple of games when he's gotten more attempts and more opportunity in that spot. He's filling a role about as effectively as anyone on this team. And those 2 blocks in this game, it looked like those drivers had him beat around the corner, and he just got up at the last second, and it's like his fingernail is blocking these guys. It's really impressive that late burst he has to block some of these shots around the rim, especially as a guy who's not that tall. I think he's 6'8", playing center a lot of the times, or at least the 4 for this group. So he's seasoned, he's smart, he's capable and quick on that defensive side of things, and I have a strong belief in him right now. I love watching him. I love his makeup here. He's definitely going to have some challenges physically translating to the 5, especially if that's what he's going to play here. But we've seen some smaller guys, Horford among them, fit into that spot and just compete defensively to the point where they're able to play bigger than their wingspan or their height might indicate. So I love what we're seeing from him here. Obviously, DJ has praised him a ton. I think he continued to build on some of the success we saw from him in that third game. And I'm just excited to see his journey right now. And as we've talked about, there is opportunity in that front court early in the year. If Porzingis and Horford are both out in a game, who's to say this guy can't compete for backup minutes with a Tillman, with a Keita? I don't think he's that far off from those kind of guys. And listen, he's going to have to play in Maine. There's no doubt about it. But he's part of that mix that in a pretty thin front court could require some minutes for him, let's say for a week or two, like it was from Keita last year. So this is encouraging what we're seeing from him. I don't want to overreact to it, but this is exactly what we see from him here.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, and I think he is an example of the not even looking at the stats, and I guess tonight the stats were pretty good. But he just looks like he knows what he's doing out there, and he looks comfortable, and I can see him being an NBA-ready player. He's up there for guys from this group that was available, these last 2 games as far as maybe being the most NBA-ready looking player. Both him and Baylor have looked pretty good, but he just seems to have a clear role that he could play on an NBA roster, and the big question is the size, and if he can play that role. People talk, I've seen a lot of this online, people are thinking, Al Horford was already a little bit undersized. He's smaller than Al Horford. Is that something that he can make up? I think he can, honestly. He just knows where to be in the right place at the right time. And he's talked a little bit about how he's only kind of improving defensively, that it's never a lack of effort, but it's, sometimes it's a lack of, angles or certain things that he's really maximizing. And so I think he's only going to get better. Expect that we'll see a lot of him in Maine at the beginning of the year. And it'll come down to, I think if Keita and Tillman and Luke, have that role nailed down, we might not see him at all next year, but one of those guys goes down or they're really struggling, maybe you bring him in as an infusion and just see if he's able to impact things. So I'd predict we don't really see him on an NBA court this upcoming year. I don't think they're that shorthanded in the front court, but that can change really quickly, right? So all of a sudden you have a couple of hamstring strains and Anton Watson's coming to town and you get to see what he can do. So it's going in that direction as well.
Yeah, and let's say he is a 4, so he'll be playing next to a center.
Yeah.
That brings him even closer to that spot. As we talked about, the lack of wings on this team does stand out a little bit, and that might be an area where he can fit in if there is a severe lack of depth going into a game. So I'm looking forward to it. He also, demeanor-wise, talking to us, seems like a guy who's pretty dedicated to the process of improving here, saying he has a long way to go to be compared to a Grant or Al or any of the names people throw around with him. So again, we've come a long way, Noah, from not knowing him that well on draft night. And the Celtics, obviously, by working him out a couple times, saw him and liked him, and were confident enough in him to draft him in the late second round, certainly, but still using a pick on him there. And we'll see where he ultimately ends up in the roster mix. Seems more likely than not it's going to be a 2-way spot for Watson. So we'll see when that becomes official. And with one game left, I think we should hear before long who's going to be moving on with this team, who's going to be signing elsewhere. And one more game is left on Sunday, correct? I don't think we have a time or an opponent.
Sunday, we don't have a time. Hopefully it's on the earlier side because I fly out of here Sunday night. So hopefully I'm here to be able to conduct a post game because I don't think there's any other reporters that will.
Yeah, that's going to be a good feeling. I had trouble getting out of there. I'm sure people had unimaginable trouble getting out of there this morning, given the outages and all that. So luckily I actually got out of there yesterday. Didn't have to wait till today. So I got off easy after all, despite sitting on the runway for a while. But another fun year of Summer League coverage. This was Noah's first. Congrats to her officially joining SB Nation with some WNBA coverage coming your way from Noah. And she'll continue to cover the Celtics this year into her second season as well. This will be my 5th coming up on the beat.
That's wild.
So we will continue to do it as a team here at CLNS Media. And before long, I think we should hear from John and Jimmy and Joe Sway, see how their summer's coming. Maybe we'll get some more news like a Hauser extension in the coming week or two here and be able to react to that and just start to piece together what this roster is going to look like, where they are in the bigger picture in the East. Some teams have made some small moves up and down the conference that we'll try to flesh out in full here and just see where this team fits going into year 2 of this core here, trying to repeat as champions. But this is the first stage, seeing where some of the young guys are at. And Noah still has you covered out there in Vegas for whoever their final opponent's going to be. But we're pretty much reaching the end of Summer League here. And it's been a sloppy roster. This wasn't one of the better ones we've seen as a team out there so far, but definitely a few bright spots worth looking at, especially the guys who played early in this showcase out there. So that's it for tonight.
I feel like if you win the championship, you're supposed to have a bad Summer League experience after. It wouldn't be fair.
Right. And some of these teams just have nobody worth looking at when you look at some of the rosters out there. So at least there's a couple guys that look like they maybe could impact the Celtics one day on this roster and are worth watching. So that's it for tonight. Shout out to the Mavs who get revenge for the finals here in this game. Celtics fall to 2-2. And they'll be back on Sunday, and so will we. We'll have post-game coverage of that game. I want to spend a minute real quick before we end this, Noah. USA coming up tomorrow. We saw 9 minutes of Derek White in that last game. Tatum, Kevin Durant's going to be back. Where does that leave him in the mix here? I do have a couple questions going into this game, and obviously it's not going to be a super competitive one. South Sudan's got a couple NBA guys, I think, but less talent than the last couple of exhibitions that we've watched. Between them is Serbia and Australia, and I think they're going to get Germany and during this London leg out here, so we'll see how that goes. But Durant's back. Tatum's been fairly uninvolved offensively, at least from a shot perspective. He's come off the bench. He's started more in 2 games, I think, out of the 3 so far, I want to say. And Holiday's been the effective glue guy. So when we look at it right now, it looks like Tatum's going to be more of a passer for this offense. I think he's only got 3 3-point attempts. And I have to think he's probably going to move back to the bench when this roster is complete here, because it's probably going to be LeBron, Durant, Embiid for now, Curry, and either Edwards or Holiday, depending on which way you want to go there. So Tatum's probably off the bench for this team, I would think, right?
Probably, although I can't predict Steve Kerr's starting lineups so far, and even last year in FIBA. I don't really know exactly what goes into it. So I would imagine he's probably going to come off the bench. Then he gets a little bit more shots that way as well. I think he's been kind of more of a connective piece in that starting lineup. I like him in the starting lineup. I think he's done a good job. But again, I think that the funny thing with Team USA is that you have so much talent and you have so many guys that can score that it's not necessarily a bad sign if Tatum takes 3 shots, right? And maybe next game is going to be the game where he goes for 14, and then that's maybe he's one of the higher scorers. But it's kind of a on any given night here, any guy can go off, and a couple of guys will maybe score double digits, and players that are used to averaging 30 will just have a handful of attempts, right? So that's the interesting thing about Olympic basketball, and thought that he defensively, he's going to have an important role, just being a guy that can guard everybody, and the way that we saw him do throughout this playoff run, and Drew Holiday as well. I think he's just a perfect Olympic player. I said that the other day. But yeah, I would encourage people not to stress too much about the shot attempts or the scoring and kind of draw too much on the NBA season from that, just because it's such a different environment to be like that, where, Joel Embiid might have 4 or 5 points in a night when we know he was scoring nearly 40 during that stretch when he was healthy this year. So it really is just completely different. But yeah, curious to see what they'll look like. Durant should help. I don't know exactly what his condition will be, if he's going to be able to play real minutes. Maybe he comes off the bench maybe he just comes off the bench because he's kind of acclimating and adjusting to things, at least to start. So who knows?
Yeah, and it is a little bit different from what we saw him in the last Olympics there. He was taking 11 shots a game on that team. It featured Lillard, Durant, Booker, Levine, Middleton, Bam, McGee, Draymond Green, Jeremy Grant, Keldon Johnson. So definitely a little bit of a different mix here in terms of the top end talent that's on this roster. You didn't have LeBron. You didn't have Curry. You didn't have Edwards in the mix. Edwards is certainly emerging as the tone setter on this team, though, in terms of the guy who's taking a lot of the attempts, who's pushing the pace in transition. So it's been interesting to watch the level with which Tatum's had to defer here, and I think it's been mostly effective. But I didn't picture him taking 3, 4, 5 shots a game on this roster after seeing what he did in the last Olympics, seeing what he did in the playoffs at different points. And the three-pointer, you would think, would be where he'd fit in here. But that's almost been non-existent. And I wonder why that is more than anything else, that he's not able to generate some more threes here and try to get going in that sense. Because as we know with the Celtics, volume three-point shooting was a major part of his role on that team and could be here as well. Again, maybe they view his role differently than Joe Mazzulla and the Celtics do. But I just see him on this roster right now. As successful as he's been, it's like we're asking the same questions we were during the playoffs, Noah. Is he doing enough in the other areas to make up for maybe the lack of scoring that he's doing right now? Or is he struggling with that shot and not able to get it going enough right now? The tough part is he really just hasn't been able to get a lot of threes off. I know he's 0 for 3, but we haven't been able to take enough out of that because he's just not getting those shots off right now. I think last game was probably his most uneven of the slate so far, coming out of that one, I think, with just a handful of shots and not many free throws or any at all, really. So I don't know. He's in a weird spot again here on this roster, and they're winning. They're rolling. But I don't know. I don't know what to make of his performance so far. I feel like I got to start to see him in some of the real games and where his role is going to be to finally make a firm assessment on it. But I'm keeping an eye on it for sure.
I don't think you can make any assessments on anybody so far. I thought Anthony Edwards, who's been the team's leading scorer, has been a little bit of a ball stopper on offense. He's been I haven't loved watching the way that he's played. I feel like people praise him a lot, and just obviously he's a very electric player right now and a very popular figure in the U.S. But I think that Tatum's been playing within the flow of the offense, and he's been contributing to winning, doing the little things. And the last game I think was his worst. I went back and rewatched that one. First two, he looked better than he did in the third one, a little bit less energy. But I think with just USA basketball, we got to just graph the box scores and just see kind of how people are contributing to all the little things, because these are a lot of star players are not used to doing all these little things. And now it's a question of who can step up and grab the loose balls and the rebounds and stay engaged even if you haven't taken a shot the entire half, because this is, again, a scenario that people aren't used to being in. And he is more so because he's used to sacrificing more than your average star because of the nature of this past 2024 Celtics team. So to me, I'm not worried at all about you can score 0 points tomorrow and it wouldn't necessarily tell us a whole lot, but it's more of a question of is he doing enough to warrant being on the floor? And I think he probably will, just from a defensive standpoint, because you don't have as much versatility in these lineups as you might have even on the regular Celtics team, depending on who you have out there. So that to me is more of his role. And if he's coming off the bench, obviously a scoring boost is a way that he can help. But this is a more stacked team than the last Olympic team from an offensive standpoint.
Yeah, and we'll see what the balance is in the end, because they are using Edwards as that volume scorer. He's been efficient in it, and no turnovers for him in that last game too. So I actually have been pretty impressed with Edwards so far. Curry went off. It's obvious that he's going to have to be a centerpiece and a guy that you get a ton of shots to here. Holiday just looks so good connectively here. Like, it's obvious that that was what they prioritized with him being out there, and he's playing that role so well. And the swing spot's probably going to come down to Embiid. He's really struggled to play with the pace this team wants to. Davis has been unbelievable off the bench. And again, you're balancing, do you stick with that Davis-Bam thing that looks so good? Bam hit 3 threes in that last game, something he's never done in the NBA, which was something to watch, just to, contrast it against what we're seeing in that setting. So it's been a different look for a lot of these guys. I feel like Booker's had to sacrifice a ton. You look at Halliburton. I don't think he's going to end up being super involved when they get these games going, but they're trying to figure all that out right now because they're almost much talent on this roster right now, and you're about to throw Durant back in there. But the one thing you can say right now is this team's probably not going to lose the way they look right now. That second unit is just stacked. I mean, they had 4 20-point performances off the bench in this last game against maybe the best team in the field. They held Jokic to 6 of 19. So they're still figuring things out, which is scary. I mean, this could end up being like an 08 level dominant team once they actually figure out who's playing where and who's getting what shots and all that. So it's going to be fun to watch once they really get rolling here. And they see when group play starts here. I think they're going to open against Serbia, I want to say, in the group play. So those two teams will be playing each other again. Starts the week of the 27th, that weekend. So Celtics. U.S. is going to play Serbia on the 28th at 8:15 a.m. out in Paris to get the Olympics started. But first, they are playing South Sudan in another exhibition, and they'll wrap up their exhibition slate on Monday, I want to say, against Germany out in London. So we'll have coverage of that. Celtics Summer League finale on Sunday as well. And that's it for tonight. For Noah out there in Las Vegas. You can check out her work starting soon on sbnation.com. When the piece is going to start rolling out?
Monday. I'm already working on it this weekend. I think I might have some downtime here in Vegas with everybody gone.
All right, sweet.
Lots of Olympics coverage.
We'll have our continued coverage over here on CLNS Celtics All Access. Of course, check out the Game Time app. Use CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply over there. Download that app today. And that's a wrap for us here on Celtics Postgame. The Celtics beat the Mavs here in their 4th game of Summer League. And we will talk to you again on Sunday. Good night.
Wait, Amit's got an outro for us, I think.
No, he doesn't.
He said he was going to work on an outro.
He had a phenomenal game.
Phenomenal.
Forfeit's out. I think it's an auction. That did not sound like a chair.
It was a freaking chair. It does sound like a chair.